All right. Welcome to episode 0.42 beta of the Unify the Vote podcast. This is first out the gate prototype of podcast, mostly about fixing our election system, but also kind of going behind the scenes with folks, both who are new to those efforts and those who've been doing it for a long time. So welcome to the Unify the Vote podcast, and welcome our first guest, Dylan Hirsch-Shell. Dylan,
Yeah,
how are
thanks.
you this morning?
Doing great, Mark. Yeah, thanks for having me on this inaugural edition. I'm excited to be a part of it.
So well, I'm glad you were willing to volunteer. You have a a bit of an interesting story in terms of my perspective. You are um, relatively new to political reform. If that is that an accurate statement?
Well, I guess it depends on when you started relative to me. I've been interested in it since 2000, and really involved, um, online discussions since 2007 or so, something like that.
What
Uh,
was your first? So that definitely doesn't qualify as new to the experience. That's 2007 was kind of right when I actually started getting more engaged in the voting method reform idea.
uh-huh.
But was what was your first sort of campaign experience with voting reform?
My first campaign experience, as in like trying to get some changes made,
Sure.
or
Yeah.
um, yeah. Well, I guess I I first got involved through the Center for Election Science as a donor. I wasn't personally involved with any campaigning. I actually I've done very little actual campaigning personally on behalf of voting reform. I've been primarily a donor.
Well, don't sell
I let
yourself.
other people do the hard work for me.
I don't sell yourself too short. I could, because the first I met you, you were folding little info magazines, volunteering,
Oh yeah,
getting signatures. So,
that that's true. Yeah, so that was for the Eugene Start Voting for Eugene campaign, um, back in, what was that, 2022?
maybe that summer of 23, maybe.
Must have
Um,
been summer of 23.
and like I said, I've got some dogs, so we're probably gonna have a little video cut here. One moment.
Thank you for holding. One of our advisors will answer your call as soon as possible.
Yes, they were so chill and sleepy, and then right about like 10 minutes before time to start podcast, they
Yeah, of
decided it was time to start playing. Um,
course.
well, and that's it was. I guess the thing that impressed me at that time was somebody who was willing to both support an effort financially, but then also show up in town, actually do work on the campaign, and put in some sweat equity besides just cutting a check. So, um,
I
and,
mean, I don't want to oversell it too much, because that was really literally only one day that I was in town doing a few things just to kind of see what people were up to. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I I don't think of there's too many things that are beneath me. I like to get my hands dirty, roll up my sleeves, and really uh, understand what's happening at a ground level in whatever I'm involved with. So yeah, that was just an example of me showing up and really seeing what it's like being on the ground as a campaigner for the Star Voting for Eugene campaign.
also, there's just really no substitute for actually talking with people that are going to be sort of asking the question, right? Like you can have as many online debates as you want, but until you engage with the broader electorate, it can be that kind of the online world of voting reform and voting methods can be very insular in terms of not actually connecting with the real issues of people of the day.
Online, it's just a bunch of nerds arguing with each other, basically, and then you have a few people who are maybe not quite as steeped in the problems that occasionally will find themselves in that environment where they're in a discussion, and sometimes they just get shouted out by the nerds who are not self-aware enough to realize that those are the very people that we need to reach if we're going to actually have any sort of real change in the real world. So yeah, that was a great experience for me going up to Eugene. I'm here in San Francisco. I flew up for a weekend, and it was twofold. It was exciting for me to be there talking to voters and real people about voting reform, but it was also exciting for me to meet you guys, you and Sarah Walk and Sass, people who are part of the movement that I had never met in real life. This was sort of the tail end of the pandemic, or I guess the pandemic was really like officially over by that point. And during the pandemic was when I started doing a lot of video calls with people and sort of putting faces to names that I had been conversing with online for years and had never really interacted with beyond that level of just text-based back and forth. And so it was really exciting for me to take it to the next level from just a video call to an actual in-person, like, hey, you're flesh and blood and you're someone like-minded, just like me. You're part of, you're my people, you're part of this community of souls that is just trying to make the world a better place through voting reform. And you get it. I don't have to sit there and talk for 15 minutes and hope you get it.
But for those who don't get it, like why voting reform, right? This is something that, and I think you jump into a community of people where people have been, battling online via text for, in some cases, decades, right? And so you get that sort of newbie experience.
Yeah.
But part of I think what gets people hooked for a long time and certainly gets them very passionate is that there's typically like a real heartfelt reason why people think voting reform is important. And so, all right, you show up on the streets of Eugene. Now you're trying to persuade somebody walking by that it's worth thinking about signing a petition. Why is it important to you, and why should it be important to anybody else?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this touches on some really fundamental questions of values and like what do we care about as human beings. And I from a very early age, probably mostly influenced by my mom kind of dragging me to community service events. I had this deep sense that I needed to do whatever I could to help improve the world around me and help other people who are maybe less fortunate than me. And that sort of ties into this general principle of wanting there to be a world in which everyone has an equal opportunity at happiness, and that ties into our, basic American fundamental values of equality and freedom, justice, this sense that, it says it all in the Declaration of Independence,
right. Everyone, I mean, life and liberty, but right after that, pursuit of happiness.
That's right. And so how do you ensure that we have a government that actually gives people that opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And that's where we kind of get to the present day with the system we have in place that implements a very specific form of democracy. And a lot of people don't realize this. They don't quite understand that democracy as an idea can come in many different forms when you get down to the nitty-gritty details. So in general, democracy is about ensuring that a government is informed by the desires, the needs, the preferences of the citizens that government presides over. But how do you actually make sure that happens? Well, we have a system right now where, by and large, we have elections periodically, and in those elections, people can express some kind of preference, and generally they're told you're allowed to say, I want that one candidate, and it doesn't matter how many candidates are on a ballot. You can just pick one candidate that you say you support, and then whichever candidate gets the most votes wins, and that's it. And election's over, and now let's move on with our lives. But the problem with that is, as you well know, and I think a larger and larger proportion of the American population is starting to become aware of, that system doesn't typically choose the candidate that is best for the population. People, and you can measure that. There's various ways that people have come up with over the years of how do you measure an aggregate level of satisfaction or happiness with the outcome of this kind of setup. And probably one of the best ways to think of it is in terms of utility, which is like this idea from economics. Every individual person, they'll have some utility, some level of happiness that they derive from the outcome. And if you just, assume in some world, like let's set up a simulation or let's do a thought experiment where we have a group of people and they all have different beliefs or different opinions about these various candidates. You can very quickly and easily come up with scenarios where, when you use this type of choose one system of voting, the result pisses off most people.
Right.
Yeah.
And what kind of began to blow my mind as I, got into this, and this is sort of in the 2014 era, was just there was what we were taught about America when we were kids at school, what the founding of the nation, the values that informed that, and kind of the directive of the founders that this was going to be a new kind of, sort of shining city on a hill concept for the world. And then, even very quickly after the country started, it goes back to like Washington's farewell address, where he explicitly warned against the, duopoly two-party system, and that was really antithetical to the notion of American democracy. But it really became clear in studying history that even though what the founders sort of wanted in terms of a representative democracy, pick the best person here to represent each in each area, that it very, very quickly devolved into this polarized duopoly, and that's kind of persisted for more than 200 years. And I think part of the thing that really got me into voting method reform was just realizing that all of that tied right back to how we make our collective choice, right? That the system we use to make that choice of representation is what ultimately creates this really polarized, kind of escalating, spiraling duopoly. And then all of the political decisions that get made are on the basis of who ends up getting in those seats.
Yeah, and you have all these other ill effects, like, there's like this pretty thin, tenuous connection between the election of a representative and the mandate from the electorate, what the true desires of the voters are. And so a person can get elected and pretty much do whatever the heck they want with if they're of the correct party for that particular district, they can literally pretty much do whatever they want, have a guarantee of always getting reelected. And so you end up with an exacerbation of money in politics because lobbyists can sink their teeth into that representative, and no one is going to hold that representative accountable. And this is a problem that, as you said, it started pretty much as soon as the Constitution, the ink on the signatures of the Constitution dried, and the very first election we had, there was this problem of who was going to win, and factions had formed, and now we are over 250 years later dealing with a compounding of that.
Right.
Over time, it just, with each election, that the problems just keep compounding and compounding and compounding. And so, it's this feedback cycle. And I really see it as a moment of desperation. Every election that we see, every passing moment, it gets more and more dire, where, like, we have to do whatever we can to make sure that the democracy that the founding fathers set up, the promise of that democracy rather, is fulfilled. And up until now, it's been very hit or miss. We've made some progress in fits and starts, and it's taken tremendous amounts of effort from many people. The suffrage movement for women in the 1920s, the civil rights movement in the 1960s, the Civil War. People had to go to war with each other. That was just like a complete and total breakdown of the democratic process. And so, that's what we're really trying to avoid with democratic government. It should be about having conversations and debate and coming to some kind of a consensus after that process of considered debate. But when you have this polarization effect that our version of democracy, this choose one, or plurality, as it's often called, first past the post, some people like to call, that version of democracy creates this polarization, which then disincentivizes that process of collaboration, which is the very core of how a democracy survives and what sets democracy apart from all these other forms of government. And I really do fear a backsliding of our country into some kind of autocratic government if we don't get a handle on this and really transform and radically modernize and galvanize our system of democracy so that it really does reflect the will of the people, and people can then become more confident in the results and more interested in participating. That's another effect of plurality.
Disillusionment
Among the electorate, because people rightfully recognize that it's not worth their time to participate in the system when you just have this group of very motivated and powerful people who have entrenched themselves and have basically maintained control year after year after year. So why would you, as an average everyday citizen, waste your time, take valuable time away from the job of raising a family and maintaining employment so that you can keep food on the table and a roof over your head?
Well, okay, I'm gonna throw a thought at you, and this is, yes, fear is a great motivator, the fear of imminent destruction, but I think there's also an opportunity that's pretty cool, right? Which is, and this came from, you've used the word democracy a few times. The word democracy it comes from demos, the people, kratia, have the power, right? So that whole, the word itself is really about the equal sharing of power in the governance of the country, right? So that is at the, and this is, Lincoln's extolling that that this nation of the people, by the people, and for the people won't perish. It's the first three words of the Constitution. So this theme of democracy and of governance by the consent of the people has been there. I think what really hit me in 2014, and I looked at you were a Center for Election Science supporter. I looked at Center for Election Science defense of approval voting under the principle of one person, one vote. And that was, it brought up this really interesting point that in the way that that an approval vote is equal with another approval vote under that principle, right? That they sort of said, well, hey, one person, one vote doesn't mean you only get to vote for one candidate on your ballot. The Supreme Court has reaffirmed regularly the notion of one person, one vote means that our votes are to carry equal weight. And so this CES made a really interesting argument about how we can see that approval voting gives everyone an equal weight vote by saying, in a three candidate race with approval, you can always, essentially balance out somebody else's vote, regardless of how many candidates there are in the field. If you're limited to just one, and you like two of them, your buddy likes the other one, you've got less power because people who think like you are going to split their votes, and people who think on the other side are going to concentrate their votes. So that whole notion of looking inside of the voting method to test the principle of one person, one vote, it wasn't very shortly thereafter that I realized, well, hey, if that very sound bit of reasoning means that approval voting meets the principle of one person, one vote, meets the idea of democracy, then the way we've been voting since the founding of the country doesn't, right? So it fails the test that approval passes. And that was where I was like, whoa, this isn't just, prevent the downward spiral of doom. This is the opportunity really to add further, clarification of the meaning of democracy within kind of the crucible of the choice process. And also to, really work to help make it happen for the first time in the country's history. So, just depending on who you're talking to, if they're more motivated by, the upside vision than, the fear of imminent harm, then, that's another selling tool in the toolbox.
Sure. Yeah. It's like an optimization process, or like let's give ourselves the best possible outcome we can.
And hey, it still might not work. I mean, the whole, democracy is doomed or whatever. You could say, it's never going to work to have representative democracy. But then I think we should at least give it a try before we categorically reject the idea.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a pretty good run so far, I think, in this latest version of it. Of course, the ancient Greeks used it for some time in Athens, and we know in Venice and in for 9 centuries or so, I think it was something like that. They were using a form of democracy to choose the DOGE. So I mean, it's been.
Oh, that's a recently updated.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
No pun intended.
We have the ancient Greeks to blame.
Yeah.
So and I also, I would say that you kind of going to pivot here to another topic, which is, you sort of said, well, I did the toe in on the Eugene campaign, which I thought was actually a pretty impressive toe. But you did much more than that, in the sense that and I do want to get to your kind of professional background, and sort of what got you to the point where you could make these speculative forays into the political process. But you didn't just support causes and show up. You actually ran for office,
Yeah.
which is, in my mind, an incredibly brave step, because you're not just supporting others and their ideas. You're actually putting yourself out there, as someone who is willing to advocate on behalf of the people, and then if you get the job, work really hard for the things you care about. And so, what can you go into a little bit of detail on what your thought process was in terms of doing that? What did you do? And then, what was that experience like being a candidate for political office?
Sure. Yeah. So I ran for mayor of San Francisco this year, and I
Start at the ground floor, right?
yeah.
No.
Go big or go home, right? Yeah. I mean, I'd been thinking for quite a while about trying to get involved in politics, not for the sake of being a candidate and running in an election. That aspect of it was the least attractive part of it. I was more interested in the governing side of things once you're elected and affecting real change. And I felt frustrated for quite some time about the lack of really thoughtful, intelligent, maybe that's not fair, but at least thoughtful and people with convictions that are able to drive real change in areas of social justice and economic um, improvements and just generally, like I guess I don't want to like get into politics and sort of my particular political views necessarily, because I do think it's important when you're talking about voting reforms that you try to make it as nonpartisan as possible. But let's just say I felt frustrated that it didn't seem like people were getting elected who were able to make real positive change, and I wanted to be that person to get in there and actually do that. And so, I thought running for mayor of San Francisco, yes, it's a very, a daunting and perhaps foolish first step to take, but I wanted to make a big statement and promote ideas of mine that I thought were really important. Universal basic income was really my flagship proposal, and I wanted to move the Overton window on it. For those who
All right,
maybe
we're gonna get to UBI in a
yeah
minute, but
yeah
Overton window. Now, is this like the Overton window, is sort of like the public opinion lens,
like
or something? Explain Overton real quick.
yeah, so like there's a sense that like certain things are on the table and other things are off the table when it comes to various policy options. And I want universal basic income to be firmly in the middle of the set of options that politicians feel comfortable with choosing to move forward on. They need to really find their political courage to back this idea, and they can't do that if they don't have some kind of evidence from the electorate that there's a desire for that to be implemented. And so I thought maybe this is an opportunity to help produce that evidence, to show that there's a hunger there among the population for this way of transforming our economy in order to really make sure no one is left behind and everyone has an equal opportunity to thrive in our society. And yeah, we can get into universal basic income
And
later.
I also want to touch on your experience in Oregon there as well. But like in terms of like the Overton window of Dylan and his willingness to, be political again as a candidate, did the first time out sort of was there a personal shift as well? And of course, we're right after the election, so not trying to hold you to anything here, but more just like uh, in that first foray, and again jumping in for a high post within the local government of a big city. Did that first experience like what was uncomfortable about it? Did you feel like you made progress personally, and then also what's the appetite for the next step?
Yeah, so it was definitely a sneak preview for me seeing the campaign in Eugene. Um, and there's many aspects to a campaign. There's the logistics of kind of how are you going to print out the literature that you're going to hand out to people? What is actually going to be on that literature? How do you decide that? How do you strategically decide where you're going to focus your efforts? How do you organize the information you're collecting? How do you handle if you need to collect signatures and get those validated? There's so many little details, and you have to think big and small and everything in between. And so like just seeing what was going on with that campaign behind the scenes in Eugene was very informative for me, and helped me to kind of get a glimpse of the scale of a campaign in terms of effort and complexity. And then there was the experience of actually being out there interacting with people in the public and working through those. I'm not a natural extreme extrovert. I'll say I'm probably kind of in the middle. I can do pretty well in many social settings with people that I feel comfortable with, but I also can feel very uncomfortable sometimes in social settings. And so and so particularly if I'm not confident in something I'm trying to sell. You really are a salesperson when you're campaigning on behalf of whether it's a candidate or a measure that's going to be on the ballot. You're a salesperson, and I'm not a good salesperson if I don't feel extremely confident in, number one, what I'm going to be saying about the product I'm selling, but number two, believing that it's a product that people should buy because it's good for them. And so,
which I think is actually a much harder thing to do when you're selling a reform, right? That's the product, and you're selling it, and you can believe in it all you
right.
want, and that's a very easy pitch to make. When you're
Yeah.
the candidate, you're the salesperson, and in some sense, the product.
Yes. And
That can
that is, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that can be really hard, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah. That's
be willing to put yourself out there.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't come naturally for me to sell myself, and so, but it was already difficult even just to sell star voting, even though I believed in my heart of hearts this is an amazing innovation. Like, you guys would be so lucky to have this as a brand spanking new voting method that's the top of the line, modern. You guys can be the flagship for the world. You can show everybody how smart you are and how lucky you are that you can use this state-of-the-art voting method.
The
But
good news is that prize is still up for grabs. So
oh
anyone
yeah,
out here listening, that's you can still be first, as
you
it turns
too could
out.
have that. Yeah, I mean, so but like even with all that knowledge, there's still also that kind of awkwardness about not wanting to inconvenience someone, and people, I could sense this person is in a hurry. Okay,
Right.
maybe I'm not gonna try to bother them. This person is having a really bad day. Okay, I'm not gonna bother them. Like I was sort of pre I was coming up with like my own sort of rationalizations slash excuses for why I shouldn't talk to this person based on my gut sense of whether they were going to be receptive to it. And I had to learn over time that, like, yes, there are certain situations where like that is true, but oftentimes I'm reading way too much into someone's face, and they're just like preoccupied with some random thought. And the second I break them out of that spell, they're extremely receptive to hearing what I have to say, you know?
So
Um,
if you were to break this down, and I do want to hear about future plans for you, but for anyone else out there who sort of has that similar sense of like, hey, I see some stuff that I'd really like to help contribute to fixing, but running for an office sounds really scary. Going to have to step way outside of my comfort zone. What would be your kind of biggest takeaways or biggest pieces of advice for anybody kind of considering the path that you walk down?
yeah, I mean, I think I don't regret for a second doing this, taking that plunge. I I was outside of my comfort zone. It forced me to become more comfortable with interacting with a much broader cross section of the population, people I wouldn't necessarily ever interact with, and it was good. It was a valuable growth opportunity for me as a person, and I think it will serve me well going forward in many future situations where I'm in a position where I have to try to influence the way someone thinks or feels about something. And I know I still am always very sensitive to the possibility of this being part of some slimy manipulation tactic for some nefarious goals. But I one trick I used, because it was still very difficult for me, even very late in the race, to like put myself on this pedestal and sell myself as a candidate and say I'm going to solve all your problems. I displaced myself and I made my policies really what I was selling, and I could feel very comfortable bothering people, getting into their day, and interrupting whatever they were doing and saying, no, this is important, listen to me, we can cure poverty, we can end it immediately
You open
with
up that
your
can and yes, we
persuasion.
can. It's just that you open up the yes, we can, and you're like, here
Yeah,
we go, let's go.
yeah.
And that is so not making it about you, making it
that,
about,
that helped me a lot.
yeah.
And but I think that it is true, and this can maybe touch on some of the, like, you know potential downfalls of representative democracies, but like elections to varying extents are kind of popularity contests, and it does often come down to who is most attractive, or who comes across as most confident, who um, who makes people feel the best when they talk,
and
and
I
it does, yeah.
there are those aspects of the person, but I think that notion of what makes you feel the best, or like I think in the political context, there are historical examples of just very inspiring leaders, right? Who it's not so much about what they're saying, but what they're saying sort of ignites within me, and involving in the shared sense of purpose, involving in, and that those appeals to the highest ideals. Obviously, there are examples of appealing to other baser instincts. There are those who, campaign on fear and retribution and so on. So I guess that popularity contest notion, I think, does get back in some sense to having more options on the table, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to at least have elections where inspiration always has a seat at the podium, and have a fair chance to pass 5 stars on that one.
I love that. What a great segue into returning back to the idea of why it's so important to have better voting methods. If you can't have a variety of styles of campaign, then you run that risk that the fear will always win out, or the xenophobia or whatever, and so we need inspiration and hope to have that seat at the table and have that equal opportunity to garner its fair share of the vote.
All right. So you ran in a very competitive field there. I mean, how many candidates were there?
Yeah. So there were 13 qualified on the ballot, 2 more qualified as write-ins later on. So you had 15 names on the ballot, and this was a ranked choice voting election. San Francisco has used that since, I think, 2002.
Yeah, early 2000.
And so, I learned firsthand, both as a candidate and as a voter, just how cumbersome ranked choice voting is when you have that many people in the race. As a voter, we're looking at a matrix of you have names in the one column here, and then you have rankings along the top, 1 through they only allow 10, by the way, which is another interesting aspect of a ranked choice voting election. Oftentimes there's limitations either of the way the ballots are printed or the way that they can be counted by the machines. They only allowed 10, even though there were 15 names. And so you've got to match up. Okay, I've got this name here, and I know I want to rank them 5th, and then this name here I want to rank 10th. And so you're doing this pretty complex operation of triangulating or whatever where you want to fill in this bubble. And even for me, I'm 42 years old. I have, pretty decent eyesight, good control over my motor skills. Even for me, I almost marked one of my options. Imagine someone who has a disability, someone who's getting on in age with poor eyesight, shaky hands, trying to keep track of which bubble you're filling out. That in and of itself is a problem that I'm sure contributes to quite a great deal of mismarked ballots that change the intent of that vote or invalidate the ballot. And it's impossible to tell the difference between those two. The ballot will only be invalidated if you have 2 of the same rankings. So you've selected more than one candidate to have the same ranking.
You can't give equal preference in ranked choice voting.
When you're using the instant runoff version of ranked ballots, for whatever reason, I mean, not that the algorithm couldn't be tweaked to allow for that too, but for whatever reason, people decided you're not allowed to rank people equally.
Yeah, and that particularly the large races, and I've talked to a number of people who have used RCV in big races like in SF, and they've said basically Well, first, to do it right, I've got to first score all of the candidates, and then I have to sort them, and then I have to fill in the ballot, because you got to sort of keep in mind where you're going to put each one. And to that point, once you get to become aware of systems like approval voting or like STAR, where you can just go down the list and say either, hey, I approve of this one, don't approve of this one, or 0 worst, 5 best, it scales much better to a large number of candidates. And that's before you even start talking about the counting system, which has the RCV counting system has serious holes as well. But okay, so again, and you did, I think, quite commendably for your first time out as a candidate, landing somewhere in the middle of the pack. What's the have you figured out, if it's too early to have figured this out, like, do you have a sense for a next campaign, or you've been very supportive of very voting method efforts? What do you see as kind of the next strong move for Dylan?
It's a good question, and honestly, I don't know yet. I'm still kind of decompressing from the election. You know, running a campaign, especially a citywide campaign in a 49 square mile city like San Francisco, it's exhausting. It just takes so much out of you. You're pretty much constantly working around the clock, whether you're sleeping and still like thinking about stuff in your dreams, or you're up at 8 a.m. to be at a transit hub where you're visible for people to see your signs and introducing yourself to people. You're at farmers markets, you're at night markets, you're out at street fairs every weekend, you're knocking on doors. I mean, it's just this never ending process. And so, and in any moment you're not out in public interacting with people, or at a Democratic club or organization speaking, you're filling out endorsement surveys, you're working on, with your designers to work on the next version of the flyer and the window sign, you're talking to volunteers, and it's just never ending. And so I accrued a lot of personal sort of interpersonal debt with respect to my relationships with friends and family, and just stuff around the house that's fallen into disrepair, and a giant pile of mail and emails. And so I'm really just kind of like resetting myself and finding my center again before I jump to the next thing. And so this is really like a very personal choice I'm making to take a step back, take a deep breath, and kind of let the universe. I'm not a religious person. I'm not really technically even a spiritual person, but I do a lot of mindfulness meditation, and I do like to be very reflective. And I feel that it's important for me at this moment in time to kind of let something bubble up to catch my attention, and become the new thing that I really focus on next. And I'll know what it is when I see it, and I'll be ready for it because I'm putting in the time now to really heal myself.
Nice. Well, we'll something to come back to in some months.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'm not one of those people that can just like check out and put my head in the sand and just live the rest of my life in blissful ignorance. I'll definitely be hungry for information and get more and more itchy to do something again.
So pivoting a little bit, you and I both have a background in clean transportation.
Oh yeah.
What do you want to talk a little bit about your the professional arc, and
Sure.
I guess how does that, what did you learn in that kind of living in the corporate startup life, how does that inform, maybe a different kind of candidate?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I'll try to give a brief intro to my background, I guess. Like I said earlier, my mom kind of instilled in me this sense of always wanting to make a positive impact in the world. Um, and I was always just really obsessed with learning in school. I excelled in pretty much every subject, and I actually considered going into the humanities for a time, but then I thought, uh, the best way I can really make a positive impact on the world is I have to go into science or engineering, and I can't really do that on my own. I have to go to college for that. I mean, this was like back in the mid to late '90s, before the internet really was a big thing, and before you had like MIT OpenCourseWare and Stanford's lectures online. So I don't know, maybe if I had that same choice today, I might make a different choice. But anyway, that's what I decided on. MIT was my first choice. I got in luckily, so I went there as an undergrad, and I studied electrical engineering.
I got waitlisted.
Did you? Oh no. Well, it's a crapshoot ultimately. I mean, they're so selective, and the selectivity, it's like they're splitting hairs, and you have no idea what they're really basing it on.
I'm sure it was a coin toss that went down in my. But anyway,
I didn't get into Stanford, so there you go.
Yeah, I didn't even bother to apply. I knew what they would say.
Yeah.
But I also had parent and siblings who went to Stanford, so I was the black sheep at Berkeley.
Hey, Berkeley had a great ECS program, right? I mean, like
truly,
some of the greats came out of there. So
you did EE and CS?
I studied electrical engineering, computer science, and neuroscience. And I thought I was going to go into artificial intelligence and create the humanoid robots that I read about in the sci-fi books that I loved. I thought that would be like the coolest thing ever.
You just missed the window.
I know, really. Like, I mean, I changed my mind because at my first AI class, I was bored out of my mind. I was like, what are we doing here? We were like, using machine learning algorithms to segment images into objects. And it was just like such a far cry from the deep understanding of thought and creativity and just like reasoning and general intelligence that I wanted to work on. And I thought, this is, this is just boring and stupid. Like, I don't want to work on this. So I kind of changed gears a little bit and decided, well, I'm going to focus on the human brain. I went to UCLA and got a PhD in neuroscience so that I could kind of learn everything I could about the way humans do this stuff, and maybe come back around eventually and apply it to robots. So at UCLA, I was studying the vestibular system and how it processes information. So the vestibular system is this like really exquisitely arranged set of linear and angular accelerometers in your inner ears, and it uses this like electromechanical fluidic system to detect how your head's moving around in space, and then it tells your brain, and that feeds into a variety of automatic reflexes, and then also your kind of conscious perceptions of moving through space. So it's pretty cool stuff. And I was using like information theory and statistics and all this probabilistic reasoning and stuff to study it. Really enjoyed that aspect of it. But at some point I realized, science as a profession in the United States of America is extremely political. You have to know the right person in the funding agencies to get the money for your grants for your lab. Being a principal investigator in a lab, as a professor at a research university, you're dealing with so much pressure. You have to teach classes for undergrads and grad students. You have to mentor grad students. You have to mentor postdocs who've gotten their PhD, and they're kind of like continuing their training for 3 to 5 years until they get their own academic role somewhere at another university. And all the while you're under intense pressure to publish constantly. And so I just looked around, I saw all these professors getting divorced around me. And I was just like,
You're like,
this
you know
can't
what? You know,
be.
be way less stressful than this is to go to work at a
Yeah.
high tech startup doing hardware. Good point.
Well, the other side of it too is like practicing science on a day-to-day basis. It's very isolating and depressing, especially the biological sciences. It's such a complex system you're dealing with, and you can never really guarantee that you're going to have any tangible results for an entire day's worth of work, and that can last for days on end. And so I'd always loved computer programming, and that to me felt like a really great way for me to feel good every day. Like I can at least look at some kind of progress that I've made and it's tangible. And so I decided I had an opportunity.
It's like trying to track down one of those like assembly language bugs and some firmware that's on and you're like, wait a minute, this has taken me 2 weeks and I haven't written a line. Anyway.
Luckily, I never really had. I only had a couple projects like that at Tesla, but So I had an MIT classmate who was at Tesla, gave me the foot in the door for an interview, and I jumped at it. This was like, this crazy transition for me to go from a PhD in neuroscience to an engineer at Tesla. But I was extremely excited about. I grew up in LA, and so I'd experienced terrible smog. I knew what air pollution could do, and I had seen Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth, which really did convince me that climate change was the great challenge of my generation. But I felt helpless to do anything about it. And suddenly I was presented with this opportunity to do something about both air pollution and climate change by working at Tesla, developing cutting edge electric vehicle technologies. And I was just like, sign me up. I'm on board. It didn't hurt too that I was going to double my salary relative to staying in academia. So, but I was still working, as like they paid me as if I had just come out of college because I really had no experience as an engineer. I was 30 years old, starting from the ground floor at Tesla, and I ended up staying there for 12 and a half years.
Wow. So that's a good run.
Yeah. I kept telling myself, I'm not really an automobile, like a car guy. I'm not doing this because I'm like going to spend my career on automobiles. Like I'm just here to help climate change. Like I'll leave once we've got the affordable mass market product out there, and my job will be done. But that was the Model 3 when that came out in 2017. It was about a $35,000 price point, and we still weren't really done though. Like the automobile industry was still lobbying very hard with the federal government to basically do whatever they could to halt progress on the expansion of electric vehicle sales. And so I kept thinking, okay, well, Tesla's still in a very tenuous spot. It's very hit or, it's touch and go. I don't know if the company's going to survive. So I want to stick around. And while I feel useful still, while I think I'm still like helping, I'll be there and do what I can.
And that's, and obviously the few years after that, really obviously, established that, Tesla wasn't going anywhere other than up. But also, I think that point that you brought up, just in terms of the sort of the policy level piece, and this was something that I was very aware of working in the entrepreneurial space in EVs, was just that you began to see the influence not just of what you're trying to do in the context of the company, but just how important that political piece of it is to the whole playing field of every industry, right? So, and that I think, just sort of back on the notion of why is election reform, voting reform so necessary is like, for me, again, I came at it, I think, from a very similar perspective as climate change being really the issue of our generation and of generations adjacent to us. But just realizing that on the, there's so much of that is driven by these sort of policy decisions and that are made, that are the product of ultimately our method of collective choice. And I mean, obviously there are all kinds of feedback loops in there. But the question in my head was sort of, are our governmental structures adaptable enough and moving fast enough to handle the magnitude of the challenges that are coming at them? And it really feels like the super polarized kind of glacial, it's like the only glaciers that are sticking around are the policy ones in our governance structure. So, that was one thing that really turned me back to say it is necessary to do the work on this one individual piece, but it's also necessary to cast the bigger lens.
Yeah, and I'm building on kind of what you were saying about like making sure a government is capable of dealing with the complexities of the modern world. I think that was another inspiration for me to run for office, to try to show that someone who has a background in science and engineering can be a viable candidate and actually represents a very valuable skill set and perspective to be able to interpret things that are happening around us through the appropriate scientific lens, to be able to choose the appropriate method of dealing with it from through an understanding of technology, and using a framework of reason and deduction and like all these logic, all these things that you learn in a formal education in science and technology that you may not necessarily learn in, I guess I'm sure lawyers, they have to deal with logic too, but I think just being more informed with the science and the technology more and more as the world becomes so complex and as our problems intersect with the natural world, we have to bring more of these kinds of people in, not just as experts who can kind of, advise the political class, but I think that we have to incorporate them into the political class as decision makers.
Is this an endorsement of the DOGE apparatus? Totally kidding.
I mean, I actually, so yeah, I think there's a lot of good that could come from streamlining and simplifying and making the government more efficient. I think it's very true that it's become bloated over time. There's a lot of incentives, going back to incentive structures. There's incentives to keep throwing more and more and more into the law books, because if a representative can go back home from Congress and say, hey, look, I got this for you guys, now vote for me again, like it's a good way to keep getting reelected, to just add more and more and more stuff. Who has an incentive to like, sit there and take the time to pour through thousands and thousands of pages of law and cross things out because they're obsolete?
There are several people who are motivated to do that currently. One are people who don't like a regulation because it says, don't dump the chemicals into the
Sure,
waterway,
sure.
right? So
Yeah,
there's a flip side to that. And I think that the efficiency argument is obviously well taken to anyone who's had um, a, a less than timely, sort of interaction with the various public servants out there. I think the question is always in my head is what is the intention in terms of that sort of amalgamation of a regulatory framework and so on. That's obviously a thing, but making sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? That
yeah,
is,
exactly.
these institutions in many cases were put into place to stop egregious abuses by those who'd sort of figured out the game of the day. And
Yeah.
so, you know, making
I,
sure it really, sort of tilts to the advantage of we the people
sure.
at the end of the day is key.
I think of it with an analogy of in as a software developer, you have this process you go through periodically called refactoring. So you have your code, you've been working on it for years, and maybe in some cases, and it's been this iterative process, and you have new people who've come in who just like built on top, and it's some people call it like the lava flow model of software development, where like one layer
Yep.
hardens, and then you have another layer that hardens, and then another layer, and then when you look at it from afar, you're like, oh my god, like you have this massive like mountain of unnecessary stuff when like all we were trying to do was some very simple thing. Let's very carefully come up with our set of requirements that we know we have to meet, tear it all apart, and then rebuild it from scratch, knowing that this is what we want to design in a much simpler, more efficient way that still meets all the requirements that the old system met. But the rub is you have to make sure you've kept track of all the requirements and you didn't forget any. And in some cases, there's also this concept of the Chesterton fence, where there's like this one line of code, maybe it has some nebulous comment that's like, don't touch this, or like, this is super important because, and then it like, the end got cut off or whatever, and you're like, oh my god, like what does this line of code do? If I remove this, does this just like break our entire system? Like I don't know. And until you understand why every part of the system is there, you shouldn't remove it because you might break everything.
Right. And I've been a part of a number of software projects where it's like, okay, this code base is getting too crufty. Like we need to start over. And then the start over project is really cool for like the first 6 months. And then it's like, oh, now we have to fix all the bugs in the new thing. We didn't capture all the things from the old thing. And I think that's given me an appreciation for, slightly more surgical optimization of existing systems rather than sort of wholesale gut and rewrite,
Yeah.
just in terms of there are risks to both approaches, but the
Yeah.
old adage of, if it's not broke or what's not broke, don't fix. Those are,
So
uh,
Elon Musk has like a radically different philosophy, which is aggressively remove as much as you possibly can. Like unless you are absolutely certain it should stay, err on the side of removing it, and then that will tell you that you've removed enough. When you find, oh crap, like this,
yeah.
something's broken, like we
And I
broke
think that,
something, then that tells you, oh wait, okay, the thing you removed that like addressed that problem should have stayed, so let's put it back in. But until you like start breaking 10% of the things, you've been too conservative.
and I think that philosophy certainly has a place in highly competitive product development. The
Yeah.
question is, what's its role in when those things that you're potentially breaking are life support structures for a wide swath of the population?
Right.
How do you, you know,
Yeah,
uh,
and also, so like he has applied that same philosophy to at least it seems to me he's used that same philosophy when it comes to layoffs at his companies. So at Tesla, while I was there, we had at least, I think, 3 or 4 rounds of pretty aggressive layoffs, and the last one I felt was particularly egregious. He basically said, we're laying off 10% of our workforce across the board in all departments, every team, in every organization. You're gone, 10%. And he demanded from the managers that they give him a list of 10% of their employees that needed to be cut. Now, I'm sure there were some teams where, yes, you could find 10% of the team where it was like, okay, they're not mission critical. But there were other teams where literally every person on that team was a rock star who had a tremendous amount of responsibility on their shoulders, because his companies are always lean to begin with.
right?
And yeah, maybe they go through periods of time where like they start hiring people who maybe are of dwindling use to the company over time. But like there are certain teams where it was like, this is a core team, they're delivering core functionality, and if you remove 10% of that team, what you're doing is you're either removing the ability for your company to do something essential, or you are making the lives of the remaining employees hell, because they are already at maximum bandwidth with what they're working on, and now you're asking them to take on additional bandwidth that they don't have. And then there's all the ripple effect on the families of those employees. So it gets to this like the impact on real human beings, individuals who are capable of suffering, who have emotional responses to being fired or watching one of their valued colleagues being fired, and then having to deal with the fallout for months on end afterwards. So, I think he has an overdeveloped sense of, a duty to humanity, and a very underdeveloped sense of what, individual humans actually experience internally, emotionally.
Getting callbacks to Wrath of Khan and Spock in the dilation crystal chamber. Anyway, well, hey, on that complete segue note, let's we're past an hour in. I figured this is we'll wrap it here in a minute or two, but one, wanted to thank you for taking time out of the day to be the very first alpha tester of the UFTV podcast. And any last thoughts? What we're in the holidays. Any New Year's resolutions? And what are the tips and tricks for keeping healthy and positive during challenging endeavors?
Yeah, well, I don't really do New Year's resolutions. I try to be aware of ways I can improve throughout the year, and I often fail. And I think one of the keys is forgiving yourself, having a deep sense of understanding and gratitude and grace towards yourself and those around you. Being healthy, I mean, it's all the stuff that they always say. Your doctors will say, are you sleeping enough? Are you eating healthy? Are you exercising? I mean, it's stuff that we often don't want to hear because it's so difficult to fit into this fast-paced, frenetic life that we're all living. And I think it's a constant battle to make time for that. But you'll thank yourself down the road. I think it's something I've struggled with, and particularly this past year, I really sacrificed a lot of my health for the sake of my campaign, and it was a labor of love. It was a passion of mine, and I kind of felt that was the right trade off at the time, and now I'm kind of flipped completely in the other direction, and I'm highly focused on my health. So I think if you have an opportunity to focus on your health, you should take it and guard it jealously for as long as you can. But I think 7 at least 7 hours a day of quality sleep, plant-based diet as much as possible, and
Nice.
making sure you sweat at least 5 days a week where your heart rate is, pretty elevated. I think
All
that's
right.
it's as simple as I can make it.
Love it. Gratitude, self-care, and at least get in the sauna, if not
Yeah, sauna's good.
do some
Fun.
cardio.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, and mindfulness meditation too. I'll make a plug for that. And if you're ever looking for a good app for that, I highly recommend Waking Up by Sam Harris. He's a fellow UCLA neuroscientist and author. And I think he's done a great job with putting together a variety of meditation styles, as well as like lectures and lessons that are very informative. So, and
Love
I'm
it.
not getting any pay,
Hey, let's
no
get,
kickback from that. So,
let's get that royalty stream flowing.
yeah.
Hey, Dylan, thank you so much. And to everyone else out there watching, thanks for tuning in. Happy holidays, and let's
Happy
go.
holidays, Happy New Year. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.